Hello, heart-centered child and family practitioner. Welcome to Holding the Work, Reflections for Child and Family Practitioners. My name is Ashleigh, a children's therapist, social worker, and social work supervisor here in Tasmania, Australia. I created this podcast as a reflective space for practitioners working with children, parents, and families. It's a place for us to pause, think about the work, and keep growing in ways that are ethical, trauma-informed, relational, and really honours the people that we work with as well as you as a practitioner. Today I'm recording this episode on Murwinanina country in the Hobart area of Lutruwita, Tasmania. And I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Palawa people as the traditional owners of the country that I'm working from today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge and express gratitude for the knowledge, wisdom and lore that has been and continues to be shared with us on this country today. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast episode. I'm really glad and grateful that you're here listening in. So in this podcast episode, I'd like for us to slow things down and explore something that sits right at the heart of trauma responsive practice. And yet it's something that is often the easiest thing for us to move past when we're busy working in children and families, doing our day-to-day, and we're thinking of the right approach, the right language, the right thing to be doing. It's this. Before we look outward, we're invited to look inward. So this invitation isn't about scrutiny or self-assessment. It's certainly not a checklist or a performance measure. Instead, it's a warm and curious practice of noticing, of gently turning our attention towards ourselves as practitioners in the work. So the thing is, children and families don't just experience our skills or our interventions, they experience us. They experience our presence, our assumptions, our nervous systems, our lived experience, our values, and our identities. These parts of us don't stay outside the therapy room or in the relationships that we have with our clients. They come with us, whether we intend them to or not. So working therapeutically with children, particularly those who have been impacted by trauma, loss, or adversity, can really take a toll on us as helpers. So for us to truly practice from trauma-informed or trauma-responsive care, we're invited to apply those same principles inward, developing awareness of our own histories, culture, biases, and nervous system responses. So in this particular episode of the podcast, I'd like for us to gently turn inward and really reflect and think about how culture, gender, and our personal histories may show up in the work that we do with children and families. And I want to start this conversation just with a really gentle reminder that this episode or this invitation to reflect certainly isn't about perfection and getting things right. I really want to name openly that reflecting on these parts of ourselves can feel really vulnerable. For many of us, they touch on really deeply personal experiences, parts of our identity and stories that we have. So what I'd really encourage you to do is hold this part of the work with care and compassion. As I said before, it isn't about getting it right. It isn't about shame or being critical of ourselves. And it isn't about proving ourselves as being good, competent, and capable practitioners. It's about having awareness, and awareness is one of the most protective and ethical things that we can bring into the spaces where we work. So why does reflecting on culture, gender, history, why does that matter in trauma responsive work? So at its very core, trauma responsive practice is relational. Children and families are constantly scanning for cues about safety and trust, often long before words are fully processed. These words come not only from what we say, but they come from how we are. They show up in what we notice and what things we overlook, what we interpret as risk, resistance, or avoidance, what we feel drawn toward, and what we are hesitant around. And they show up in how we respond when we feel stressed, uncertain, overwhelmed, or emotionally activated. Our culture, gender, and history shape the lens through which and how we see the world. Often, this lens operates so quietly and automatically that we forget that it's even there at all. And I just want to remind you that this certainly isn't a flaw. It just is part of being human. But it does invite us to ask an important question. An important question about our practice. What might we be bringing into the room without meaning to? So when we think about culture and hear the word culture, many of us first think of ethnicity or nationality. And while these are really important aspects of culture, culture is actually much more broader and more layered than that. So when we think about culture, it can include things like family norms, rules, and values, our beliefs about parenting, authority, respect, ways of expressing emotion and or not expressing it. It can include in things like our attitudes towards independence, interdependence, and help seeking. Our communication styles, whether it's direct, indirect, quiet, more expressive, can include things like professional and disciplinary cultures, even organizational and systemic cultures as well. So our own cultural norms often become invisible to us because they feel normal to us. And they feel normal until we start working with a family whose norms differ from our own. And this invisibility can really subtly shape how we interpret behavior, attachment, boundaries, or engagement. So when we think about culture, we might think about whether what we considered or what was considered good behavior in the family or community that you grew up in, or how were emotions responded to? Where were they comforted, minimized, contained, punished, or celebrated? What messages did you receive about needing help or showing vulnerability or even asking for support? Brief moments of noticing here can really soften our interpretations and expand the way we hold children's behaviour or parents' responses. So when we think about gender, gender is another powerful layer that really shapes both our experiences as practitioners, but also our clients' experience of us. Gendered expectations shaped by family, culture, systems, and lived experience can really influence whose voices are taken seriously, who is expected to be in control and hold authority, who is expected to carry the emotional labour, What emotions are seen as acceptable or too much? What is interpreted as assertive versus aggressive? And what feels safe to disclose and to who? Families may respond to us consciously or unconsciously through their own histories of gender, safety, care, and power. Likewise, we may notice our own patterned responses emerging in particular situations as well. So when we think and reflect about gender, this isn't about blaming ourselves for our biases. It's about developing awareness so we can practice with great humility, responsiveness, and care. So when we think about history and our personal histories, many people are drawn to working with children and families because they might carry their own experiences of care, adversity, attachment, rupture, or repair. These experiences often shape our empathy, attunement, and commitment to this work. We certainly don't need to disclose our histories for them to have an impact in our work. Our personal histories can influence what activates us or dysregulates us, what we avoid or move away from, where we are over functioning or where we rescue, what we feel deeply protective of, and what we instinctively move towards to soothe or to fix, and how we hold boundaries, conflict, and uncertainty. At times, our nervous system responds way before our cognitive mind has a chance to catch up. And trauma-responsive practice invites us to notice these moments with kindness and without judgment. So if it feels supportive for you, I've got a couple of questions here that you might like to sit with slowly. What part of your identity feels most visible in your work, and which parts feel unseen or protected? What assumptions do you carry about good parenting, healthy emotion, or appropriate behaviour? Where do those assumptions come from? When do you feel most confident with families, and where do you feel more uncertain? What might sit beneath that? How might your culture, gender, and history shape what you interpret as safety, risk, resistance, or trust? What would it look like to hold more curiosity and less certainty when you notice yourself becoming more activated? And if any of these reflections feel tender, please do take care. This is slow work, and it's allowed to unfold gradually and over time. This is one of the reasons why I really value supervision and safe supervision spaces so deeply, is that it really offers us a space to explore these layers without doing it alone. Supervision can support us to notice patterns with compassion rather than judgment. Supervision can help explore identity, power, and context ethically, can help us to understand our nervous system responses and strengthen our boundaries with clarity and confidence. And it really helps us to stay connected to the why of our work, our values, and our care for children. If this particular podcast episode has left you with more questions than answers, that's okay. Sometimes trauma responsive growth looks like noticing something new, softening towards it, staying curious, seeking support, and returning again gently. Your willingness to reflect on culture, gender, history, and how they shape your work is not a sign that you're doing anything wrong. It's a sign that you're practicing with integrity, humility, and authenticity. These are the qualities that children and families feel when they work with you. If you'd like to support through any of these reflections that we've talked about today in this podcast episode in a really steady and grounded way, you're really welcome to reach out to me at Children's Therapy Tasmania. And we can have a bit of a chat about what support might look like for you over this little season. Until next time, take care.